The morning briefing always started the same way at Fort Braxton's helicopter training facility. Names rattled off assignments like machine gun fire, each one followed by a specific role, a call sign, a purpose. Rachel Sloane stood in the back corner of the briefing tent, her rope bag slung over one shoulder, listening to the familiar rhythm of organized exclusion. Martinez, primary rope specialist, call sign Viper 2. Thompson, backup rescue coordinator, call sign Eagle 1. Davis, equipment lead, call sign Hawk 3. The list went on. 23 names, 23 assignments, 23 purposes. Then came the end. Sloane, rider, non-eval, no call sign. The words hit the same every time, but today they felt heavier. Rachel had been at Fort Braxton for 8 months now, longer than half the people who just got their assignments. She'd watched trainees come and go, watched them earn their wings, their respect, their place in the unit. She'd watched from the sidelines, holding clipboards and sorting gear while others learned to save lives. Staff Sergeant Jake Morrison dismissed the group with his usual bark. Gear check in 15. Anyone not ready gets kitchen duty. The tent erupted in movement as soldiers grabbed their equipment and headed for the door. Rachel waited until the crowd thinned before making her way to the exit. "Hey, dead weight!" called out a voice behind her. She turned to see Danny Carson, a broad-shouldered tech specialist with perpetually half-zipped gear vest. He was grinning, but not in a friendly way. "Shop is still sorting equipment today?" His buddy, Mike Torres, chuckled. "Glad she's not on my bird. Thing would probably fall out of the sky from embarrassment." Rachel kept walking. She'd learned months ago that responding only made it worse. But she caught the way Morrison's eyes flicked toward her when Carson used that nickname. The staff sergeant didn't tell them to stop. He never did. Outside, the North Carolina morning was crisp and clear. The UH-60 Blackhawks sat on the tarmac like sleeping giants, their rotors still in the dawn light. Rachel made her way to the equipment staging area where mountains of gear waited to be organized, checked, and distributed. Rope coils, harness bags, carabiners, rescue equipment, all the tools that could mean the difference between life and death in the field. She began her work methodically, checking each piece of equipment against the inventory list. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, testing the strength of rope fibers, examining carabiners for stress fractures, ensuring every buckle and strap was secure. This was work she could do in her sleep, work she'd been doing for 8 months while others learned to fly. "At least someone's useful for something," she heard Torres mutter as he passed by with his team. They were heading to the practice area for rappelling drills. Rachel had watched those drills dozens of times from a distance, memorizing every technique, every safety protocol, every hand signal. She knew the procedures better than some of the trainees actually performing them. Around noon, she overheard a conversation that made her stomach drop. Morrison was talking to Captain Lisa Burke near the command trailer, their voices low but not quite low enough. "The problem with Sloane," Morrison was saying, "is that she just doesn't have what it takes. Some people are natural athletes, natural leaders. Others," he shrugged, "others are better suited for support roles." "Have you actually tested her capabilities?" Burke asked. "I've seen enough. She's unsteady on her feet, hesitant in high-pressure situations. I'm not putting my people at risk to prove a point." Rachel's hands stilled on the rope she was coiling. Unsteady? Hesitant? She'd never even been given a chance to show what she could do. Every request to join training exercises had been met with the same response: "You're not cleared for that level of operation." But what Morrison didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Rachel had been training herself. Every evening after the official training ended, she found quiet corners of the base where she could practice. She'd rigged her own anchor points behind the supply tents where she could work on knots and climbing techniques without anyone watching. She'd studied every manual, memorized every regulation, practiced every scenario she could imagine. Her personal training rope was hidden in her footlocker, worn smooth from countless hours of practice. She could tie a bowline with her eyes closed, execute a perfect figure-8 follow-through in under 10 seconds, and rappel down a makeshift training wall she'd built behind the maintenance shed. But none of that mattered if no one would give her a chance to prove it. That afternoon, she was assigned to inventory duty in the supply depot, while the rest of her unit conducted live helicopter training exercises. Through the depot windows, she could see the Blackhawks lifting off, their rotors churning up dust and debris. She watched them disappear over the tree line, carrying her fellow soldiers to training she'd never be allowed to attend. "One day," she whispered to herself, the words barely audible over the hum of the depot's fluorescent lights. "One day I'll show them what I can really do." But as she turned back to her endless columns of inventory numbers, that day felt very far away indeed. 3 weeks later, the rumors started. Rachel first heard them in the mess hall, whispered conversations that died when she approached, something about dead weight taking up space and budget cuts coming down from command. She tried to ignore them, but the sideways glances and sudden silences were impossible to miss. The rumors gained substance when she overheard Morrison talking to Lieutenant Colonel James Bradford outside the administrative building. She'd been returning equipment catalogs to the supply office when their voices carried across the courtyard. "Sir, I've got a unit that needs to be lean and efficient," Morrison was saying. "Every person needs to pull their weight in combat situations. I can't afford to have someone who's just taking up space." "Are you talking about Sloan?" Bradford's voice was measured, professional. "Yes, sir. 8 months in, and she's never been cleared for any operational training. She's basically a very expensive inventory clerk at this point." Rachel's blood went cold. She pressed herself against the wall, straining to hear more. "What's your recommendation, Sergeant?" "Transfer her to logistics, or better yet, discharge her altogether. She's not cut out for rescue operations." Bradford was quiet for a long moment. "I'll take it under consideration, but I want to see her full file first." As their footsteps faded, Rachel realized she was shaking. Discharge. After everything she'd worked for, after all the training she'd done on her own time, they were talking about getting rid of her entirely. That evening, she found an unexpected ally. Elena Martinez was one of the few female soldiers in the unit, a tough-as-nails rope specialist who'd earned her place through sheer determination. She approached Rachel after evening chow, her expression serious. "We need to talk," Martinez said quietly. "But not here." They walked to the edge of the base, where the practice obstacles created pockets of privacy. Martinez lit a cigarette and studied Rachel for a long moment. "I heard Morrison talking to Bradford today," she said finally. Rachel's heart sank. "About transferring me out." "Yeah." Martinez took a drag. "But here's the thing. I've been watching you. I see you practicing behind the supply depot. I see how you handle the equipment, how you know every regulation by heart." Rachel stared at her. "You've been watching me?" "Kid, I've been where you are. 3 years ago, they tried to wash me out too. Said I was too small, too weak, that I'd be a liability in the field." Martinez's smile was grim. "I proved them wrong, but only because someone gave me a chance. Morrison won't give me a chance." "Maybe not, but chances have a way of creating themselves." Martinez dropped her cigarette and ground it under her heel. "Keep practicing, keep preparing, and when the moment comes, and it will come, you better be ready." As they walked back toward the barracks, Martinez added quietly, "There's something else you should know. Morrison's been putting pressure on the trainees to complain about you. He wants documentation that you're a problem." Rachel's stomach churned. "What kind of complaints?" "Equipment delays, safety concerns, anything that makes you look incompetent." Martinez's jaw tightened. "Carson and Torres have been especially helpful in that regard." The next morning, Rachel found evidence of Martinez's warning. A report had been filed claiming she'd provided faulty equipment that caused a training delay. The equipment in question, a rope harness, had been perfectly functional when she'd checked it, but somehow the buckle had been damaged between her inspection and its use in training. She knew it was sabotage, but she couldn't prove it. The official record now showed equipment failure due to inadequate inspection by Specialist Sloan. By the end of the week, 3 more similar reports had appeared in her file, each one small, each one plausible, each one another nail in the coffin of her military career. But Rachel didn't crumble. Instead, she adapted. She began documenting everything, photographing equipment before and after her inspections, logging exact times and conditions, creating her own paper trail. If they wanted to play games with her reputation, she'd be ready. More importantly, she intensified her secret training. The practice area behind the supply depot became her second home. She rigged increasingly complex scenarios, timing herself, pushing her limits. She studied accident reports and rescue case studies, learning from every failure and success she could find. One evening, as she practiced knot tying in the fading light, she heard footsteps approaching. She tensed, expecting Morrison or one of his cronies to catch her in the act. Instead, she saw Martinez emerging from the shadows. "Not bad," Martinez said, examining the anchor point Rachel had rigged. "But you're overthinking the backup knot. In a real emergency, you need something simpler." For the next hour, Martinez taught Rachel techniques that weren't in any manual, shortcuts learned through years of real-world experience, tricks that could save precious seconds when lives were on the line. "Why are you helping me?" Rachel asked as they packed up. Martinez was quiet for a moment. "Because talent shouldn't be wasted, and because Morrison's not the only one who gets to decide who belongs in this unit." As they parted ways, Martinez added one final warning. "Bradford's reviewing your file next week. Whatever Morrison's planning, it's coming soon. Be ready." Rachel nodded, but inside she felt the walls closing in. She was running out of time to prove herself, and the people in power seemed determined to see her fail. But she wouldn't go down without a fight. The axe fell on a Tuesday morning in late October. Rachel was in the supply depot conducting her daily equipment inventory when Morrison appeared in the doorway. His expression was unreadable, but she could sense the tension radiating from him like heat from an engine. "Sloan, my office, now." The walk across the base felt like a death march. Other soldiers stopped their conversations as they passed, sensing something significant was happening. Rachel kept her spine straight and her expression neutral, but inside, her heart was hammering against her ribs. Morrison's office was Spartanly, decorated, a few military citations on the wall, a single photo of his wife and kids on the desk. He closed the door behind them and gestured to the chair across from his desk. "Sit." Rachel sat, her hands folded in her lap. Morrison opened a thick folder on his desk. "I've been reviewing your performance record, Sloan. 8 months in this unit, and your contributions have been limited." He began reading from the reports, the equipment failures, the training delays, the safety concerns. With each item, Rachel felt her military career slipping away. "Now," Morrison continued, "I want to be fair. So I'm going to give you one final opportunity to prove you belong in this unit." Rachel's pulse quickened. "Sir? Tomorrow we're conducting a comprehensive training exercise, high-altitude rescue simulation, full equipment load, multiple extraction scenarios." Morrison's eyes were cold. "You'll be part of the evaluation team." For a moment, Rachel felt a surge of hope. Finally, a chance to show what she could do. Then Morrison delivered the crushing blow. "You'll be observing and documenting safety violations from the ground. Any trainee who fails to meet standard will be recycled, and you'll be responsible for the paperwork." The hope died in her chest. "Sir, I'd like to request participation in the actual training." "Request denied." Morrison's voice was flat. "You're not cleared for operational training, and frankly, I don't think you ever will be." He closed the folder and leaned back in his chair. "Sloan, I'm going to be direct with you. This unit requires a certain caliber of soldier. We need people who can think fast, act decisively, and perform under extreme pressure. People who can save lives, not endanger them. Sir, if you'd just give me a chance to demonstrate..." "I've seen enough." Morrison stood, signaling the end of the meeting. "Report to the training area at 600 tomorrow. Bring your clipboard." As Rachel stood to leave, Morrison added one final insult. "And Sloan, try not to get in anyone's way." She left his office with her jaw clenched and her fists tight. 8 months of patience, of taking their insults, of proving herself through small actions. all of it worthless. They'd already decided she didn't belong, and nothing she did would change their minds. That evening she called her sister Amy, back home in Ohio. "They're going to wash me out," Rachel said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I can feel it." "Come home," Amy said immediately. "You don't need to prove anything to those people. Dad's construction company is always hiring and—" "No." The word came out harder than Rachel intended. "I'm not giving up. Not yet." "Rachel, honey, sometimes you have to know when to fold." "I've been folding for 8 months. I've been quiet. I've been patient. I've been everything they told me to be, and it's gotten me nowhere." She thought about Martinez's words. Chances have a way of creating themselves. "I'm not leaving," Rachel said finally. "Not until I've shown them what I can really do." After hanging up, she sat in her empty barracks room, staring at the wall. Her roommate had been transferred out weeks ago, and the replacement had never arrived. The isolation was complete. Even her living space marked her as an outsider. She pulled out her personal training rope, running it through her fingers. Nylon was worn smooth from hundreds of hours of practice. Every knot, every technique, every safety protocol lived in her muscle memory now. She was ready for anything they could throw at her. The question was, would she ever get the chance to prove it? As she prepared for bed, Rachel made a decision. Tomorrow's training exercise would be her last as an observer. One way or another, she was going to find a way to show them what she was capable of. Even if it meant disobeying orders. Even if it meant risking everything. Outside her window, the Black Hawk sat silent on the tarmac, waiting for tomorrow's mission. Rachel stared at them through the darkness, imagining herself finally inside. One of those aircraft, finally part of something that mattered. Tomorrow, she thought. Tomorrow changes everything. She had no idea how right she was. The next morning arrived gray and cold, with a sharp wind cutting across the training area. Rachel stood at the edge of the landing zone, clipboard in hand, watching the pre-flight preparations with the eye of someone who'd memorized every detail from months of observation. 3 Black Hawks were staged for the exercise, their rotors still but ready. The training scenario was ambitious, a multi-stage rescue operation in mountainous terrain with trainees rotating through different roles: rope specialist, medic, navigator, crew chief. It was the kind of comprehensive exercise that separated the competent from the exceptional. Rachel's job was to observe and document, nothing more. But as she watched the final briefing, she noticed something the others had missed. The weather report showed an incoming storm system, with winds expected to increase throughout the morning. The terrain they'd be working in, a series of ridges about 20 miles north, was notorious for unpredictable wind patterns. She'd studied those ridges extensively during her own research, memorizing the topography, the wind patterns, the emergency landing zones. She knew that area better than some of the instructors leading the exercise. Martinez approached her as the briefing concluded. "How you holding up, kid?" "I'm fine," Rachel said, though they both knew it was a lie. "Look, I know Morrison's got it out for you, but sometimes the best thing you can do is prove them wrong by doing your job better than anyone else." Martinez glanced around to make sure they weren't being overheard. "Even if your job is just watching and taking notes. Elena, what if I told you I've been studying those ridges for months, that I know the terrain better than half the people going up there?" Martinez raised an eyebrow. "I'd say that's exactly the kind of preparation I'd expect from someone who deserves to be in this unit." Before Rachel could respond, Morrison's voice cut across the area. "Mount up! First bird lifts off in 5 minutes." The training exercise began with textbook precision. Rachel watched the first helicopter lift off, its rotors beating a steady rhythm against the morning air. Inside were 6 trainees and 2 instructors heading for the first phase of the exercise, a basic rappelling insertion at the base of the ridge. She documented everything: departure time, weather conditions, crew composition, equipment load. Her handwriting was precise, her observations detailed. If Morrison wanted perfect documentation, she'd give him perfect documentation. The second bird followed 10 minutes later, carrying the medical team and backup equipment. The third would remain on standby at the base, ready to respond to any emergencies. An hour into the exercise, the first signs of trouble appeared. "Command, this is Eagle 1, came the voice over the radio. "We're experiencing higher winds than forecasted. Gusts up to 30 knots on the north face." Rachel looked up from her clipboard. 30-knot winds were at the edge of safe operating parameters for rappelling operations. She'd read enough accident reports to know that wind shear at that altitude could turn a routine exercise into a life-threatening situation. "Copy, Eagle 1, came the response from the command post. "Monitor conditions and advise if you need to abort." But the exercise continued. Rachel could see the distant specks of the helicopters moving between the ridges, their positions shifting as pilots fought to maintain stable hover in the increasing wind. Her radio crackled again. "Command, this is Viper 2. We've got a trainee having difficulty with the rappel, requesting additional time on station." Rachel knew what that meant. Someone was having problems on the rope, either mechanical failure or more likely panic at the sight of the terrain below. She'd seen it happen during ground training. Confident soldiers who froze when faced with the reality of descending into empty space. She began calculating in her head. Extended hover time in high winds meant increased fuel consumption. The helicopters had enough fuel for the planned exercise, but not for extended delays. If the weather continued to deteriorate, they'd be facing a choice between completing the training and maintaining safe fuel reserves. 20 minutes later, her prediction proved accurate. "All stations, this is command. Weather is degrading faster than anticipated. Winds now sustained at 25 knots with gusts to 35. All aircraft RTB immediately. Return to base." The exercise was being aborted, but as the helicopters began their return journey, Rachel heard something that made her blood run cold. "Command, this is Eagle 1. We've got a problem. Trainee Martinez has become separated from the main group. She's approximately 200 meters up the north face, and we can't get a stable hover for extraction due to wind shear." Rachel's heart skipped. Elena Martinez, the woman who'd been mentoring her, who'd believed in her when no one else would, was stranded on the ridge. "Eagle 1, what's your fuel state?" came the urgent response from command. 15 minutes to emergency reserve, command. We can't maintain hover long enough for a safe extraction." Rachel closed her eyes, visualizing the terrain. The north face of that ridge was a nightmare, nearly vertical rock with minimal anchor points. In high winds, it would be almost impossible to get a helicopter close enough for a standard rope extraction. But there was another way, a technique she'd read about in advanced rescue manuals practiced in secret behind the supply depot. It required a rescuer to rappel from a moving helicopter, secure the stranded person, and then both be extracted together. It was dangerous, technically, demanding, and definitely not authorized for training exercises. It also required someone with exceptional rope skills and intimate knowledge of the terrain. Rachel looked at her clipboard, at the careful notes she'd been making all morning. Then she looked at the radio in the command post, where voices were growing increasingly urgent as they tried to figure out how to save Martinez without risking the entire crew. She made her decision. Dropping her clipboard, Rachel ran toward the standby helicopter. The crew was already spinning up, preparing for an emergency response. She could hear Morrison shouting behind her, but she didn't stop. She had skills, she had knowledge, and she had a chance to save the person who'd believed in her. For the first time in 8 months, Rachel Sloan was done being invisible. "What the hell do you think you're doing, Sloan?" Morrison's voice cut through the rotor wash as Rachel approached the standby Blackhawk. The aircraft was already spinning up, its crew frantically preparing for an emergency rescue mission. Chief Warrant Officer Tom Bradley, the pilot, was running through pre-flight checks, while his crew chief, Sergeant First Class Mike Torres, loaded additional rope and medical equipment. "Sir, I know that terrain," Rachel shouted over the increasing noise. "I've studied those ridges for months. I know where Martinez is stranded, and I know how to get her out." "You're not qualified for this mission," Morrison grabbed her arm. "Get back to your observation post." But Captain Burke appeared at Morrison's shoulder, her face grim. "What's your experience with high-altitude rescue, Sloan?" "Ma'am, I've studied every manual, every case study. I've practiced advanced rope techniques on my own time. I know the weight ratios, the anchor points, the emergency procedures." Rachel's words came fast, urgent. "More importantly, I know that specific ridge, the wind patterns, the rock formations, the approach angles." Burke looked at Morrison, whose face was red with anger. "Sir, we're running out of time. Martinez has maybe 20 minutes before hypothermia becomes a factor, and our other birds are low on fuel." "She's not cleared for operational deployment," Morrison insisted. "Neither was I when I made my first emergency rescue," Burke said quietly. "Sometimes the mission chooses the person, not the other way around." The radio crackled with increasing desperation. "Command, this is Eagle 1. We're at bingo fuel in 12 minutes. If we can't effect extraction now, we'll have to abandon the rescue until weather improves." Rachel stepped forward. "Captain, I can do this. I know I can." Burke studied her for a long moment, then turned to Bradley. "Chief, what's your assessment?" Bradley, a veteran pilot with over 20 years of experience, looked Rachel up and down. "Ma'am, I've seen this soldier around the aircraft. She knows her equipment, knows the procedures, and right now she's the only one volunteering to go down that rope." Torres, who'd been listening to the exchange, stepped forward. "Captain, I've seen her work. She handles equipment like she's been doing it for years. If she says she can do it—" Morrison's face was apoplectic. "This is insane. You're going to risk a rescue mission on someone who's never been in combat. Never been. Tested. Sergeant, stand down," Burke commanded. "This is my call." She turned to Rachel. "You understand what you're volunteering for? This isn't a training exercise. The winds are gusting to 40 knots, the terrain is unforgiving, and if you make a mistake, both you and Martinez die." "Yes, ma'am, I understand," Burke nodded once. "Gear up. You've got 3 minutes." The next few minutes passed in a blur of activity. Rachel strapped on a flight helmet, adjusted a full-body harness, and checked her equipment with the methodical precision she'd practiced hundreds of times in secret. Every buckle, every carabiner, every piece of gear was exactly where she expected it to be. Torres helped her into the helicopter, his earlier skepticism replaced by professional focus. "You? Ever been in a bird during high winds?" he asked. "No," Rachel admitted, "but I've studied the physics. I know what to expect." Physics is one thing. Reality is another. Torres clipped her safety line to the aircraft's anchor point. "Trust your training, trust your equipment, and trust us." "To get you back." As the Black Hawk lifted off, Rachel felt a strange calm settle over her. This was what she'd been preparing for, even if she hadn't known it at the time. All those hours of practice, all those memorized procedures, all that studying, it had been leading to this moment. Through the helicopter's window, she could see the ridge where Martinez was stranded. The wind was ferocious, causing the aircraft to buck and sway like a living thing. Below, the terrain looked even more forbidding than in the photographs she'd studied. 2 minutes out," Bradley announced through the intercom. "Winds are gusting to 42 knots from the northwest. This is going to be rough." Rachel checked her gear one final time. The rescue rope was coiled and ready, her harness was secure, and the emergency medical kit was strapped to her back. In her mind, she ran through the procedure: rappel down, secure Martinez, signal for dual extraction, ascend together. Simple in theory, deadly if executed incorrectly. "There," Torres pointed through the window. "I can see her." "She's on that ledge, about 60 meters down the north face." Rachel looked and saw a small figure huddled against the rock wall. Even from this distance, she could see that Martinez was in trouble. Her body position suggested injury or exhaustion, possibly both. "I'm going to hold position as long as I can," Bradley announced, "but these winds are pushing us around pretty good. You'll have to move fast." Rachel positioned herself at the helicopter's door, her hands steady on the rope. Below, the ground seemed to move and shift as the aircraft fought the wind. She'd never been afraid of heights, but this was different. This was stepping into empty space with nothing but rope and faith to keep her alive. "Remember," Torres said, gripping her shoulder, "if things go wrong, cut yourself loose. We'll find another way." Rachel nodded, but they both knew there wouldn't be another way. This was Martinez's one chance. She took a deep breath, checked her anchor point one last time, and prepared to step into the wind. "Ready?" Bradley asked. "Ready," Rachel confirmed. And then she was falling through space, the ground rushing up to meet her, with nothing but skill and determination to guide her down. The moment Rachel left the helicopter, the world exploded into chaos. The wind hit her like a physical blow, spinning her on the rope and slamming her toward the rock face. She fought to control her descent, using techniques she'd practiced behind the supply depot, but never in conditions like this. The helicopter above bucked and swayed, making her lifeline dance wildly through the air. 40 feet down, her boots scraped against granite. She pushed off, trying to establish a rhythm despite the gusting wind. The sound was overwhelming. Rotor blades cutting through turbulent air, wind screaming across the ridge, her own breathing loud in her helmet. "How you doing down there, Sloan?" Torres's voice crackled through her radio. "Still descending," she managed, her voice steadier than she expected. "Winds are strong, but manageable." That was only partially true. The winds were trying to bash her against the rock face, and she was burning energy fast fighting to maintain control. But she was making progress, and more importantly, she could see Martinez clearly now. Elena was wedged onto a narrow ledge about 20 feet below Rachel's current position. Her face was pale, her left arm hanging at an odd angle. She looked up as Rachel approached, her expression shifting from despair to disbelief. "Rachel? What the hell are you doing here?" "Rescuing you," Rachel called back, adjusting her descent. "How badly are you hurt?" "Dislocated shoulder, maybe broken ribs. I can't climb, and I can't hold onto a rope for extraction." Rachel reached the ledge and clipped into a natural anchor point in the rock. The ledge was barely wide enough for both of them, with a 1,000-foot drop on one side and vertical granite on the other. The wind was stronger here, funneled by the rock formations into a howling tunnel. "Okay, here's what we're going to do," Rachel said, uncoiling her rescue rope. "I'm going to secure you to my harness, and we're going to go up together." "Tandem extraction." Martinez stared at her. "Rachel, you've never done a tandem extraction. Hell, you've never done any extraction. This is insane." "Maybe, but it's also your only chance." Rachel began rigging the tandem harness system, her hands moving with practiced efficiency despite the conditions. "I've studied the procedures, I've practiced the techniques, I can do this." Above them, the helicopter was struggling to maintain position. Rachel could see the aircraft sliding sideways in the wind, the pilots fighting to keep their hover stable enough for extraction. "Command, this is Sloan," she radioed. "I'm with Martinez on the ledge. She's injured but conscious, preparing for tandem extraction." "Copy, Sloan. Be advised, winds are increasing. We can hold position for maybe 5 more minutes before we hit emergency fuel reserves." 5 minutes. Rachel's hands moved faster, checking and double-checking the rigging. The tandem system was complex. 2 people, 2 sets of gear, multiple connection points. One mistake could kill them both. "Elena, I need you to trust me," Rachel said as she helped Martinez into the auxiliary harness. "I know you don't think I'm qualified for this, but I'm the best chance you've got." Martinez winced as Rachel adjusted the straps around her injured shoulder. "Kid, if you get us both killed, I'm going to haunt you forever." "Deal." Rachel clipped the final carabiner and tested the connection. "Okay, we're rigged. When we start up, keep your injured arm against your body and let me do all the work. Don't try to help, just stay relaxed and trust the gear." She signaled to the helicopter, and the extraction began. The first few feet were the hardest. See, combined weight of 2 people put enormous strain on the rope system, and the wind kept trying to slam them into the rock face. Rachel used her legs to push off from the granite, protecting both herself and Martinez from impact. "How you doing?" she asked Martinez as they rose slowly through the turbulent air. "Terrified," Martinez admitted, "but impressed. Where did you learn to do this?" "From you," Rachel said simply. "From watching, from studying, from practicing when nobody was looking." They were halfway to the helicopter when disaster struck. A massive gust of wind caught them broadside, spinning them violently and slamming them toward the rock face. Rachel, managed to get her feet up in time to absorb most of the impact, but she felt something give way in her shoulder harness. "Problem," she radioed to the aircraft. "I think I've got a gear failure. One of my carabiners is showing stress fractures." "Can you continue the ascent?" Bradley's voice was tight with concern. Rachel examined the damaged gear. The carabiner was cracked but still holding. It might last long enough to get them to the helicopter, or it might fail catastrophically. "I can continue," she decided, "but we need to move fast." The final 20 feet of ascent were a nightmare of wind, fatigue, and mechanical stress. Rachel's damaged gear creaked ominously with each movement, and she could feel her strength beginning to fade. But she kept climbing, kept pushing, kept fighting the elements that seemed determined to claim both their lives. When Torres's hands finally reached down to grab them, Rachel had never been so grateful to see another human being. He hauled them into the helicopter with practiced efficiency, immediately beginning medical assessment of Martinez while Rachel collapsed against the bulkhead, shaking with exhaustion and adrenaline. "Nice work, Sloan," Bradley said over the intercom as they banked away from the ridge. "That was some serious rope work." Rachel looked back at the ledge where they'd been stranded just minutes before. It looked impossibly small from this distance, impossibly dangerous. She couldn't believe she'd actually done it, but she had. She'd executed a complex rescue under extreme conditions, saved Martinez's life, and proved that all those months of secret training had been worth it. As the Black Hawk headed back to base, Rachel allowed herself a small smile. For the first time in 8 months, she felt like she belonged. The landing zone at Fort Braxton was crowded with personnel when the Black Hawk touched down. Word of the emergency rescue had spread quickly, and it seemed like half the base had turned out to see the aftermath. Rachel could see Morrison standing near the command post, his face dark with anger. As the rotors spun down, Torres helped Martinez out of the aircraft and onto a waiting stretcher. The medics immediately began their assessment, but Elena waved them off long enough to grab Rachel's arm. "Thank you," she said simply. "I owe you my life." "You don't owe me anything," Rachel replied. "You believed in me when nobody else would. This just makes us even." Martinez was whisked away to the medical facility, leaving Rachel standing alone on the tarmac. The crowd of onlookers stared at her with a mixture of curiosity and disbelief. She could hear whispered conversations. "That's the one who's never been cleared for operations. She actually pulled off a tandem extraction." "Did you see how smooth that extraction was?" Morrison pushed through the crowd, his face flushed with anger. "Sloan, what the hell did you think you were doing out there?" "Saving a life, sir?" Rachel replied, her voice steady despite her exhaustion. "You disobeyed direct orders. You're not qualified for rescue operations. You could have gotten yourself and Martinez killed." Before Rachel could respond, Captain Burke stepped between them. "Sergeant Morrison, I authorize Specialist Sloan's participation in the rescue operation." "Ma'am, with all due respect, that was a mistake. Sloan has never been cleared for..." "For what?" Burke's voice cut like ice. "For demonstrating exceptional skill under pressure? For executing a flawless tandem extraction in conditions that would challenge our most experienced operators?" Lieutenant Colonel Bradford approached, having witnessed the entire exchange. His expression was unreadable as he studied Rachel. "Specialist Sloan, I understand you performed the rescue despite having no official operational training." "That's correct, sir." "Then where did you learn advanced rope techniques?" Rachel straightened her shoulders. "I've been training myself, sir. Every evening for 8 months, I've been practicing behind the supply depot. I've studied every manual, every case study, every accident report I could get my hands on. I know those ridges better than anyone in this unit because I've been preparing for a moment like this." Bradford's eyebrows rose. "You've been conducting unauthorized training?" "Yes, sir. Because I knew that someday someone's life might depend on skills I was never going to be allowed to learn officially." Morrison stepped forward again. "Sir, this is exactly the kind of insubordination I've been documenting. Sloan has repeatedly..." "Sergeant Morrison." Bradford's voice was quiet but carried absolute authority. "I want to see Specialist Sloan's personnel file in my office. Now." 20 minutes later, Rachel found herself sitting across from Bradford. while Morrison stood at attention beside the desk. The personnel file lay open between them, thick with incident reports and negative evaluations. "Sergeant Morrison," Bradford said slowly, "I've been reviewing these reports about Specialist Sloan. Equipment failures, safety violations, general incompetence." He looked up. "Yet today, she executed a complex rescue operation that you're qualified." "Personnel couldn't manage. How do you explain this discrepancy?" Morrison's jaw worked silently for a moment. "Sir, even a broken clock is right twice a day. One successful mission doesn't erase 8 months of documented problems." "About these documented problems," Bradford picked up one of the reports, "this harness failure that supposedly resulted from inadequate inspection by Specialist Sloan. I've had our equipment specialists examine it. The damage pattern is consistent with deliberate sabotage, not wear failure." Rachel felt her heart skip. They'd discovered the truth. Bradford continued, his voice growing colder. "I've also spoken with several personnel who witnessed some of these alleged incidents. It seems there's been a systematic campaign to undermine Specialist Sloan's reputation." Morrison's face went pale. "Sir, I can explain." "Can you?" "Because it appears to me that you decided this soldier didn't belong in your unit and then manufactured evidence to support that conclusion." Bradford closed the file. "That's not leadership, Sergeant. That's cowardice." The room fell silent, except for the hum of fluorescent lights. Rachel could hardly believe what she was hearing. "Furthermore," Bradford continued, "I've reviewed the footage from today's rescue operation. Specialist Sloan's performance was textbook perfect. Her technique, her decision-making, her execution, all exceptional. She demonstrated skills that many of our certified operators don't possess." He turned to Rachel. "Where did you really learn to climb like that?" "My father was a mountain rescue specialist in Colorado, sir. He taught me basic techniques as a child. When I joined the military, I continued developing those skills on my own time." "And you never mentioned this background because?" Rachel glanced at Morrison. "Because Sergeant Morrison made it clear that he wasn't interested in my qualifications, sir. He'd already decided I didn't belong." Bradford nodded slowly. "Sergeant Morrison, you're relieved of training duties pending a full investigation into your conduct. Report to Colonel Williams immediately." Morrison's face went through several colors before settling on a sickly gray. "Sir, this is dismissed, Sergeant." After Morrison left, Bradford leaned back in his chair and studied Rachel. "Specialist Sloan, I owe you an apology. You've been failed by this command structure, and that's unacceptable. Sir, I just want to do my job. Your job is about to change significantly." Bradford pulled out a fresh form. "I'm recommending you for immediate advancement to rope specialist certification. Additionally, I'm putting you in charge of developing new training protocols for high-wind rescue operations." Rachel stared at him. "Sir? What you did today required not just skill, but innovation. You solved a problem that stumped our experienced personnel. That's exactly the kind of thinking we need more of in this unit." As Rachel left Bradford's office, she felt like she was walking in a dream. 8 months of humiliation and doubt had just been swept away in a single conversation. But more than that, she'd finally found her place. Outside, she ran into Torres, who'd been waiting in the hallway. "Heard Morrison got the boot," he said. "About time." "Danny, I want to apologize for—" He held up a hand. "You don't owe me any apologies. I was wrong about you. We all were." He paused. "That was some serious climbing today. Where'd you learn? To move like that?" Rachel smiled. "Practice. Lots and lots of practice." As she walked back to the barracks, she could see clusters of soldiers talking, their conversations stopping as she passed. But the looks weren't hostile anymore. They were respectful, curious. Some even nodded as she went by. For the first time in 8 months, Rachel Sloan felt like she belonged. 3 months later, Rachel stood in front of the assembled training unit, a clipboard in her hand and confidence in her voice. But this time she wasn't taking inventory or documenting other people's achievements. She was leading the advanced rope rescue seminar that had become the most requested training course on the base. "The key to high wind extraction," she explained, to the group of 20 soldiers is reading the air currents and using them to your advantage rather than fighting them. The mountain doesn't care about your schedule or your comfort zone. It only responds to skill and preparation. In the front row, Danny Carson, the same soldier who'd called her dead weight months earlier, raised his hand. Specialist Sloan, when you're dealing with multiple casualties in extreme conditions, how do you prioritize the rescue sequence? Rachel smiled. Carson had become one of her most dedicated students after witnessing her rescue of Martinez. The transformation in his attitude hadn't been immediate, but it had been genuine. Excellent question, Danny. Let's work through a scenario. After the class ended, Rachel was packing up her equipment when Captain Burke approached. Outstanding session, as always, Burke said. I've got news that I think you'll want to hear. Ma'am? Your training protocols have been selected for implementation Army-wide. Special Operations Command wants you to conduct training seminars at Fort Campbell and Fort Benning. Rachel felt a surge of pride mixed with disbelief. They want me to train Special Operations personnel? They want the soldier who revolutionized high-altitude rescue techniques in adverse conditions, Burke corrected. Your methods have already saved 6 lives in real-world operations. As Burke walked away, Rachel reflected on how dramatically her life had changed. She now held certifications in advanced rope rescue, high-altitude operations, and emergency medical response. Her personnel file, once thick with negative reports, now contained commendations and recommendations for further advancement. But the biggest change wasn't in her official status, it was in how she saw herself. Elena Martinez appeared at her shoulder, her arm still in a sling but healing well. Penny for your thoughts? Just thinking about how different things are now, Rachel said. 8 months ago, I was sorting equipment and getting kicked out of briefings. And now you're training the trainers, Martinez grinned. I told you that talent shouldn't be wasted. They walked together toward the mess hall, where Rachel had reserved a table for the informal gathering that had become tradition after her training sessions. Soldiers who'd completed her courses often stayed to discuss techniques, share stories, and build the kind of camaraderie that made units stronger. You know what the best part is? Martinez continued. Morrison's replacement, Sergeant First Class Johnson, actually asked for input from his team. Revolutionary concept. Rachel laughed. She'd heard that Morrison had been transferred to a logistics position at a base in Kansas, a fitting end for someone who'd tried to reduce her to nothing more than a clipboard carrier. At dinner, she found herself surrounded by soldiers who sought her advice, respected her expertise, and treated her as an equal. The conversation ranged from technical discussions about equipment to stories about recent rescues to plans for future training exercises. Hey, Sloan, called out Mike Torres from across the table. Tell them about the time you had to improvise anchor points during that storm rescue last month. As Rachel launched into the story, she caught sight of her reflection in the mess hall window. The woman looking back at her was confident, respected, and exactly where she belonged. It had taken 8 months of patience, persistence, and ultimately courage to get here, but she'd finally found her place. After dinner, she walked alone, to the spot behind the supply depot where she'd conducted her secret training for so many months. The makeshift anchor points were still there, weathered but functional. She ran her fingers along the worn rope marks in the concrete, remembering the frustration and determination that had driven her to practice here, night after night. Her phone buzzed with a text from her sister, Amy. Saw the article about your promotion in the Army Times. Dad would be so proud. Rachel looked up at the stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Her father had taught her that mountains didn't care about your plans or your timeline. They only respected preparation and skill. The same was true of military bureaucracy, she'd learned. You couldn't force recognition, but you could make yourself so valuable that recognition became inevitable. A year ago, she'd been ready to give up, to accept that maybe she didn't have what it took for military service. But something had kept her going, the same stubborn persistence that had driven her to practice knots in the dark and study terrain maps by flashlight. Now, as she headed back to the barracks, Rachel thought about the soldiers she'd be training next week, the lives that might be saved by the techniques she'd developed, and the career that stretched ahead of her, full of possibilities she'd never dared imagine. She'd started as dead weight in everyone else's eyes, but she'd proven that sometimes the most overlooked person in the room is exactly the one you need when everything goes wrong. Rachel Sloane had found her place at last, not by demanding it, but by earning it one knot, one climb, one saved life at a time. The end. This story reminds us that talent often exists in places we don't expect to find it. Sometimes the quietest person in the room is preparing for their moment to shine. Rachel's journey from outcast to expert shows us that persistence, preparation, and courage can overcome even the most entrenched prejudices. Her success wasn't built on luck or connections. It was built on the determination to be ready when opportunity finally knocked. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and become a part of our everyday life stories. Community, where are you watching from? Drop a comment below. We love hearing from our amazing viewers around the world.